Kindie Rockstars. Prepare for a treat, let's meet and greet some bands and singers that are super sweet, making music that's fun for boys and girls. Help them learn about this great big world. Fun for the family, yes it's true, your kids will love it and you will too. Clap and dance and sing aloud, become a part of the Kindie crowd. These songs will make you move your feet and give your ears a great big treat. So settle in, grab your guitars, and let's get to know our Kindie Rockstars. Hello everyone, and welcome to Kindie Rockstars. This is the show that gives you the stories behind the songs from some of the best bands and singers that are making fun, informative, educational, catchy, and occasionally silly songs for children and families. I'm your host, Patrick Adams, and each episode of Kindie Rockstars will feature an artist and a featured song. So let's get to this week's show. It is an honor for me today to be here with children's music pioneer and legend, Louis Polisar. Barry, thank you so much for joining the show.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
The list of accolades for Barry over the years is just astounding. Grammy Award winner, started an Emmy Award winning TV show called Field Trip, had a song in an Academy Award winning movie, Juno, called All I Want Is You. Five-time Parents' Choice Award winner, Lifetime Achievement Awards, Children's Book Awards. Barry, that's just to start. That's an incredible body of work.
Well, I'm often reminded of the line that Billy Crystal used when he got some award, and he said, you know, his great uncle used to say, you hang around the store long enough, eventually they give you something. So I've been at it, for 45 years. 1975 is when I began. The first couple of years I was in the wilderness. I kind of had the field to myself, but it was a unmarked territory. And as the years progressed, I got my career evolved and changed and hopefully improved. So I've been at it a long time.
So what made you get into children's music specifically back in the 70s?
I think a lot of children's performers, and certainly me, sort of stumbled onto it by accident. I went to college. I had planned to be a teacher. I always loved literature. I loved stories. I loved film. I loved all the different ways of telling stories. And while I was at the University of Maryland, a teacher saw me with my guitar, asked me if I would come to her school and visit her kids. And she said, "Oh, you write songs?" I literally just started writing songs, playing the guitar. She talked me into visiting her school. And I really mean she talked me into it, because I was like, I've never done anything like this before. You want me to get on stage in front of 500 kids? How can I do that? But she was persuasive, and I had an incredible time. And as soon as that show was over, I literally got swamped by kids all around the stage. "Mr. Polisar, those are funny songs. Where did you learn them?" "You wrote them? How do you get your ideas? How do you write your songs?" The irony was that after the show, I was supposed to immediately go and speak to kids about how I get my ideas and songwriting. And organically, they were asking me all these perfect questions, and the questions I was hoping I was going to get in the workshop. And so I was answering them and telling them I'd be talking about that in a few minutes, when all of a sudden a teacher walked into the assembly room who was not part of the program, and she saw these kids talking to me, and she literally started yelling at the kids. "What are you talking for? This is an assembly program. You're not here to have a good time. Wipe those grins off your faces. You're acting just like children." And I immediately realized that this was going to be really a funny song if I wrote down everything she said and worked it into a humorous song. And that night, I literally wrote the song, "I've Got a Teacher, She's So Mean." And a lot of my friends were teachers. A lot of my friends were student teachers, had already been teaching in the schools, and word spread that I had written this song about a mean teacher. And I tell this story, my phone rang, Is this very Louis Polisar? Yes. Is it true that you wrote a song about a mean teacher? And I'm going, yes, I did. Well, I'm a teacher and I want to know, can you come to my school and sing that song? True story. That's how it began. And, once I wrote that song, I realized I could write about anything. I'd be at my parents' house having dinner. My mom would try to get my little brothers to eat their food. Well, your older brother, Barry, he's eating his broccoli. Why can't you be like him? That night, I wrote a song called He Eats Asparagus. Why can't you be that way? And every experience just produced a song. And those were the early years. And I think within 4 or 5 months, I had written about 20 different songs. At the end of the summer, I got a job working in the parks for something like $25 a week or something ridiculous. And I used the money to make an album, not to launch a career, just it was a way for me to sort of play it forward, to take the money that I had made singing, which didn't feel like a job, it felt like fun, and make an album. Because every time I would do a show in the parks, people would come up, not just kids, but adults, counselors, parents that were there would say, wow, those are funny songs. What did you learn them? Did you write them? And once I said I wrote them, they said, well, do you have an album? And, you hear that 20, 30 times, you go, well, maybe I should have an album, just to say, hey, here it is. So back then, I sold the album at cost. I didn't want to make any money on this ideal career. And in a funny way, even now, fast forwarding 45 years, because I visit a lot of low-income schools, a lot of at-risk schools. I have all my songs on my website for free. I have all my books in digital format on my website for free. Yeah, they're sold at all the normal places, but they're also available for anybody anywhere in the world if they have access to a computer.
Yeah, so interesting topic about the books. When did you start writing your children's books?
Well, I've always had a love of books. I've been a writer. Even my strength as a songwriter has really been as a storyteller in songs. I don't do a lot of really fancy, musical things, although later albums were more produced and more musical than the early stuff from the 70s. But I actually branched into books when I did a songbook. Once again, it was just the way that the world worked. When I had record albums, I was always able to put a lyric sheet with the albums. When cassettes replaced albums, I had 20 songs, sometimes 25 songs on each album. I mean, I just couldn't, the cassette insert would be, really long. So when the cassettes came around, I decided to take all my songs and publish them as a songbook. A crazy thing to do. The very first book I published was 202 pages long with illustrations and line drawings. And that was the start of getting that book. And once I had a distributor who agreed to sell the book to stores, it freed up an immense amount of time, because she also took my cassettes as well. And I had all these ideas bubbling in my head, a book of imaginary dinosaurs, a funny book about manners, a silly book about Halloween. And they just came out one after the other. It was like they were waiting to be born, and suddenly they were just boom, boom. One came after another. I think in the year we have twins, and the year our twins were born, I called it the year of new releases, because I think I released an album and a couple books and the kids. So it was a lot all happening at once.
So I'm really fascinated with the evolution of children's music over time, and you like you said, you got started in the 70s and then continued on through the 80s, the 90s, into the 2000s. I'm interested, you described it as kind of a wilderness and so forth, but what was it like? You can kind of start in the 70s. What was it like doing children's music back then?
Yeah, when I began, and that was actually part of the story that I sort of left off, when I was asked to perform at the school. It was for older elementary school kids, I think 4th and 5th graders, perhaps, that was the school. And I looked around at what I could perform. And there were a lot of nursery rhymes and songs for really young kids. Pete Seeger, Oscar Brand had some, basic sing-alongs. Ella Jenkins had already done some things, but they were really geared for really younger kids. And then there was rock and roll, and then there was like top 40 music, and there was really nothing in between, nothing that to me spoke to kids in that middle group. And I remember I wrote a couple songs for that very first show. In fact, one of the very first songs I wrote for kids was "I'm a three-toed, triple-eyed, double-jointed dinosaur with warts up and down my back," a real tongue twister of a song. And I played it, and kids howled and laughed, and they still do. It's one of those songs that seems to have survived the decades. But looking around and seeing what material I wanted to perform, I realized there was not a lot for that older elementary age group. And even today, I think most people who write for kids write for toddlers, preschoolers, the early elementary age. And I was sort of gearing my work for that slightly older group. And I think to some degree that's gotten me in trouble over the years, because when people think of kids music, they lump everything, from a 2-year-old to a 10-year-old, and they go, "Oh, it's all kids music." Well, it really isn't. Tastes evolve. Kids have different attitudes and ideas as they get older. And so to anticipate that very first concert, I wrote a couple songs. I wrote 3 songs. And then, of course, I did the concert, overheard the teacher yelling, and then I actually was in the bathroom getting ready to do the workshop. Oh no, it was before the show, and there was a little boy in there, and he was just kind of standing around, and I said, "Well, is everything okay?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't have my homework, and I don't want to go back to class. I'm just kind of hanging out here for this afternoon." And I remember saying, I said, "Well, there's going to be an assembly in the school in about 10 minutes. I think he'd probably enjoy being, going there." So I actually wrote a song called "I Don't Believe You're Going to the Bathroom." I wrote a third song called "Shut Up in the Library." And I literally that day doubled my repertoire. And all of those songs ended up on the first album. And then, I just kept writing more songs. But again, in terms of, once I began, it was very fertile ground, not just for ideas, but libraries and schools started calling me up. I mean, every time I would do one show, word would spread. "Hey, did you hear about this guy? He sings these funny songs for kids." And I put myself through college singing in the schools. I graduated. I had planned on going back to get a master's in English or film or literature or something like that. And I said, "Well, I have 6 months worth of bookings lined up. Let me do those first." And every time the time would roll around, I'd have another year's worth of shows lined up. And it was just too much fun. I was just having a great time. And I kept writing more songs. And every time I wrote a new song, but did a new album, it kind of gave my career a different push. Then along came the 80s, and I continued through that. The 90s were interesting because at that point, the idea of political correctness was just starting to creep in a little bit. I actually had a school district in my own home state try to have me banned. It became a big, big story mostly because I didn't roll over. I fought it and got reinstated back in the schools, and the publicity almost killed my career. People think, "Oh, you can't buy that kind of publicity," but you also can't say censorship and children in the same breath and not have an effect. I lost every job I had that year. Schools just called up and they said, "We love your stuff. You've been to our school many, many times, but the principal said nothing controversial this year." And I said, "Well, I've never been controversial before," but suddenly, here was a school district that, removed me from the list of approved performers. And they reversed themselves a year later, got back in the schools. And then that publicity resulted in a TV show. I guess about a year had gone by, and I was back in the schools. My performance levels were back up to where they were. And then I got a phone call from one of the local news stations. They wanted to do a feature on me, and specifically what happened a year later, and I remember talking to my wife. I said, "Gosh, a year later, I'm back to where I was. I'm busy and I've got shows everywhere. But boy, if I start talking about this, it's going to bring it all back." But at the same time, we're talking about First Amendment rights. We're talking about freedom of expression. And so I agreed to do the show, and turns out that one of the CEOs of the television company had kids, and I had been to their school the year before, and he heard me speaking about what had happened and said, "Oh, he's pretty good on camera. Let's bring him in and see if we could do a show with him." And that led to the TV show Field Trip. And I did that I did a couple years, 2 or 3 years of filming, and it was on the air for a long, long time, and then broadcast overseas. I mean, it really kind of went everywhere. And then eventually I was replaced by puppets. So,
was that your first foray into television?
well, it was. I'd always done live television as a guest appearance, even as far back as 1975 when I was working in the parks. That the very first season, after I had written a song about the mean teacher and I'd written some other songs, I said, well, maybe I could write some more songs and go around the parks or wherever there's kids, camps, whatever, and sing these songs. And the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, one of the local park systems outside of DC, had hired me for a series of shows in their parks. And as a way to publicize it, they had me go on Bozo the Clown to advertise that I was going to be doing these shows. And that was my very first TV appearance. I've got the clip of that on my website. I joke that I came on the screen, and I found out many years later that my sister and all of her friends were watching TV, and there I was in a close-up, and her friend said, "Emily, isn't that your brother?" And she said, "No." but so I did shows like that all through the 70s and the 80s. I would do guest appearances. There would be feature appearances. Shows like Evening Magazine, PM Magazine, Panorama, sort of like the talk show format, highlighting entertainment, that sort of thing. And then, of course, when the school tried to have me banned, I was on television daily for about 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, it was a big, big story. And it was a story, I think, because there were a lot of things going on in America socially. 2 Live Crew had gotten arrested in Florida for their concert. Dennis Berry was on trial in an art museum in Ohio for showing photographs that were questionable. And there was just a lot of conversation about censorship and what's appropriate. And then here was a school that comes along and thinks that my funny songs about not putting your finger up your nose is suddenly inappropriate. And so it just became a hot story. It was on NPR, it was on TV news, it was on newspapers, and then finally, I got reinstated, and that was it.
Did that school act on their own, or were they pressured, do you think?
Funny story. It was a high school music teacher who was the head of curriculum selection. He's long passed. He was an older fellow then, and he was in charge of deciding what recordings were appropriate for the school curriculum. And he got wind that a school was hiring me, called them up on his own, not as a representative of the school, just said, "I'm so-and-so, and I am with the Anne Arundel County Board of Curriculum Development, and I've heard Mr. Polisar's songs, and we did not approve those albums in our curriculum." And the school got like, oh, they were doing a show with me like the next week. They called me up, they put me on a conference call with the guy, and he repeated that. And they said, "Well, I do understand that my record albums are not in the system, but I'm on all the approved lists in the county and in the state. I've been performing in the county for 15 years already." And his comment was, "Well, if it was up to me, you wouldn't." And when he got off the phone, he started making phone calls to the local arts league, pretty much saying he represented the school board and didn't feel my work was appropriate. And then the arts league effectively caved and pulled me. And one of the great ironies of life was I didn't work that much in that county in those years, and I was going to drop out of the showcase anyway. But when they called to cancel me, the hair on my back went up, and I went, well, if that's what they're going to do, I'm going to fight to get back in. And actually, a friend of mine mentioned it to the Washington Post. They did a front page story about it. The ACLU called me and said, "This is a freedom of expression thing. We would like to represent you. And I mean, it took a year to get me back reinstated, but and in fact, I have a story actually. I mean, I am sort of proud about it. Proud of it. I mean, it's not something I'm ashamed of. I actually have a story on my website on censorship, and I tell the story that the very first time I went back in the schools a year later, and I was trying to think, do I say something? But you know, these are kids I'm performing for. They probably don't even know about this. And I actually ended up singing my song "Underwear is Everywhere," which is a very, very silly song, funny song. Underwear is everywhere, mostly underneath. But the last line of the song is "Underwear with lots of holes is a sorry sight. Look around and try to see who's wearing theirs too tight." And I got to that line, and every teacher in the auditorium stood up and applauded. And it was like such a touching moment for me to realize that my struggle about being able to perform, to have my songs heard, was really their struggle too. You know, were they allowed to let me in? Were they allowed to listen to my music or share my music with the kids? So it was worth the trek. It was a meaningful moment.
Did you find that your songwriting and topics changed any after that incident?
It did. It actually did. I often refer to it as I sort of won the battle, but I then began thinking about the skirmishes, and it's kind of a fundamental belief that I have that there is truth everywhere, and that listening is important. And that's my early songs were about listening to kids. My early songs, they're not really anti-authority as much as they are about giving kids a chance to be heard. And I think that was the popularity of that early material, was that, you know, kids and families and parents and teachers saw that, you know, even the song about the mean teacher, it wasn't really about a mean teacher as much as it was about a kid who's trying to express themselves and not being able to in that kind of structured environment. But when it was all done, I went back and I listened to my old songs, and I realized that the albums that I had recorded, because this is already 1990, this was easily a good 15, 16 years after I started writing and recording songs. And humor changes over time. Things that you were funny in the 70s and the 60s, just, you know, you listen to a lot of comedy albums from that time. You listen to a lot of, if you listen to at the original Alice's Restaurant, there are words and phrases that you just don't hear anymore because things do change. And so I had lyrics that were very reflective of the time I wrote them, but I had stopped singing a lot of those songs. I'll give you an example. In Our Dog Bernard, the song about a dog who runs away from home, inspired by a time when my dog was missing for a couple of days, and I wondered where the dog went. But there was a line in it. He ran off with a milkman. Nobody knows what a milkman is anymore. He ran off with the milkman. He's living with him now, I hear. Spends his time in darkened bar rooms, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. And, it was a very funny line when I wrote it. Kids and adults laugh. The adults got the idea, he's going to the dogs. But now that's substance abuse. And I had sort of stopped singing that song, or stopped singing that verse, because it was sort of uncomfortable. And I had later rewritten it, re-recorded it, and it kind of resurrected the song. Another example is Early Sunday Morning, a song about two kids that get into a food fight. And this is a really extreme example. The kids are finally discovered in the morning, and they've totally destroyed the house. There's peanut butter on the curtains and on the sofa, and ice cream melted everywhere. And the line is, Daddy was angry and Mommy got the strap, and they didn't tell us stories when they put us on their laps. Well, when I wrote the song and performed it, everybody took it as a metaphor that the kids got punished. But when you say get the strap now, or even in 1990 and 2000, whoa, that's something different. So I was able to rewrite the song. That line is now, Daddy was angry, Mom yelled some more at us. She said we had to clean up. There was nothing to discuss. That's the way we parented. And so in 1993, I went back into the studio, and I basically did covers of my own songs. By then I had a budget, which the old albums were just me and the guitar and rough and one take done. off key and out of tune sometimes. But the newer albums, I brought in fiddle players and mandolin players and slide guitar and lead guitar and just really produced sounds. And then it gave me the opportunity to tinker with the lyrics. Now it's a real thin edge. I wanted to be very careful. I didn't want to self-censor myself, but at the same time, I wanted to be able to sing these songs to a modern audience and not just have these old songs be relegated to the archival bin of history, the stuff I did in the 70s. Of course, the joke was on me because when my songs started appearing in TV and radio shows and commercials, just about every single song that they've used has been from the original recordings back in the 70s, but they've also been picking the love songs and the sweeter songs. And so, I didn't take the old albums out of print. They're still in print, but I sort of did an update. Personally, I like the newer things. I mean, I hear all the musical ear snacks. My friends who helped me on the recordings, I mean, they just did amazing musical versions. And so people that don't know my stuff really love the new stuff because it's musical and more sophisticated. But the people that grew up on those old albums, they like the old originals. So they're both available. They're both out there and people can choose.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about how your song "All I Want Is You" ended up in the movie Juno. Did they reach out? Did they reach out to you?
That was just a fun thing. There's a story and then there's a backstory. The short version is that Jason Reitman, the director of the movie, was looking for a song with a slightly different title. He was looking for a song called "You Are the One I Want," and he typed in "All I Want Is You" by mistake, found my song, listened to it, and liked it, and emailed me and said, "Hey, I'm working on a movie. I'd love to be able to use your song." And that's how the song ended up. But there is a backstory, which I haven't shared quite as much, and that is that there was a record company called CD Baby that was run by a guy named Derek Sivers back in the in the early 90s. And suddenly, when I finally got around to moving my entire catalog from cassette to CD, I called him up to see about getting my stuff in his distribution network. And he went, "Barry Louis Polisar, oh my, you're not going to believe this, but before I formed this record company, I used to work as a clown in a circus in the 80s. And I sang your songs every day for like 3 years. And I feel like I owe you all these royalties." I said, "I don't care about that. I'm happy that you loved them and you shared them and you sang them." But he said he wanted to not only take my newer albums, I was only going to promote the new things in distribution. And he said, "I want those old albums too, because those old albums, that's the stuff I know and I love." So because of that, my old recordings also went onto CD and also went into the CD Baby pipeline, and they supplied iTunes. And it was the director of Juno who was listening to iTunes when this old version popped up. And I remember I tried to sell him on the newer version. I said, "I have a much more musical version of that. I'm actually singing on key, and my guitar is actually tuned on this new version." He said, "Nope, I like the old one. I want that old one." So, it's just one of those things of the way things work, circumstances. But Derek knowing my work, sharing my work, and wanting those old albums, which got me into the pipeline of iTunes. And of course, they now supply Spotify and Amazon and everybody else. I mean, I've pretty much walked away from the business end of distribution. I kind of let everybody else handle that now. And for me, I just post my stuff for free on the website and hope nobody minds.
So that song appearing in that movie, did that generate like a spike in interest in all of your old stuff? Did you find that there were increased listens or sales or people reaching out to you?
Yeah, there were. There definitely was. Well, it was interesting to watch because first there was for that one song for sure. I mean, that song just spiked. The soundtrack album that won a Grammy and went platinum. But what happened later was that people said, "Well, what else has this guy done?" And so then they got onto my website and they discovered the other songs. Now, most of my songs are not like All I Want Is You.
Right.
I have 16, 17 albums, and every album I had one or two sort of childlike love songs. That's how I describe it. A kind of, happy childlike love song. I Need You Like a Donut Needs a Hole. Me and You. All I Want Is You. I Love Your Eyes. And just to name a couple of them on the albums. And those really took root among people who were kind of discovering my work. And then also people discovered that I had stuff for kids. But more importantly, people who were kids in the 70s and 80s who now are adults and had children of their own kind of were reunited with my original work. And many of them called up and said, wow, you came to my school when I was like 9 years old, and now I've got a 9-year-old and they're listening to your stuff. So, it was just nice to see the way that progressed and evolved. And what really shifted is once the song was in the film, I had a couple other songs in other movies, none like the effect that Juno had, but then I had commercials calling up and wanting to use the songs in their ads on TV. And after a career of so many years, 30 years before my song was in Juno, when the song appeared in Juno, I feel like I sort of got discovered worldwide. But then when the commercials started airing in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand, in the US, in Mexico, in Canada, it was like even more people heard my songs that way than they heard in the movie. And so, it is an interesting thing to realize how pop culture gets heard. And that was always one of my biggest gripes, biggest realizations, that as a single person releasing my own albums on my own label in the mid to late 70s and early 80s and 90s, how do people even know I exist? It was back then, it was mostly a word of mouth network, friends told friends. But, with the movies and television, it sort of exploded. Now, I don't think people necessarily know me by name or know me by face, but you mention certain songs, they go, oh yeah, I love that song. And I can't tell you how many times. I was at a wedding, a friend of ours, their daughter got married, and they asked as a favor would I sing All I Want Is You, during the proceedings. And the gentleman came up to me afterwards and said, yeah, I know that song from that movie in Juno, but man, you do a much better version of it. I was like, should I tell him that was actually me in the movie? I was like, nah, it was great. It was a fun story.
Switching gears a little bit, what was it like to perform at the White House?
Chaotic. It was back in the 90s. George Bush Sr. was the president then, and it was actually during an Easter egg roll. So it was a big, outdoor lawn thing. Sherry Lewis was there. I think they had 3 stages set up. It was interesting because it happened during the time of the ban in the schools, and so it almost didn't happen because there was so much publicity about the ban. And then the headlines, ban singer to perform at White House, literally was a headline, singer who's banned in Anne Arundel in the schools is performing at the White House. And it suddenly was taking on this very, very political tone. I remember ABC TV called up and they wanted to do a story on me. But the White House kind of got wind of all the publicity that was happening, and they said, "Look, this is an event for kids. We don't want to make this political." And they asked me not to talk to the press for 24 hours, and I had to tell ABC TV. I said, "Well, I can talk to you tomorrow, and I can't talk to you about it today." And of course, the next day it wasn't a story anymore. But it was in that context. George Bush Sr., his wife, Barbara Bush, was a very big person with literacy. And she had a radio show, which I think is what led me to the radio thing that I did, called Mrs. Bush's Story Hour or Mrs. Bush's Story Time. And she read my poems on her radio show. So I don't know if that was how they found out about me or if they found out about me through another source, but clearly I got invited to perform in the midst of this, school thing.
How was it to perform there? Was it a lot of security, a lot of preparation? Were you told
It was
what
a
you
different
could and
time
couldn't do?
in the early '90s. It wasn't a lot of. I mean, you had to go through a security gate, but it was basically like a festival, like a fair. I mean, there were just kids and families and balloons everywhere. Most of my shows then, and even to this day, are in the schools. And so those are the shows that I love because, Johnny Cash talked about when he used to perform in prisons. It was a perfect audience because everybody was like just happy to be there, and they were attentive, and they were a great audience. And that's what schools are like. I mean, when I do the school assemblies, they bring in 500 kids in one room, and the energy in that room is amazing. I mean, it's all geared to the stage. So when I performed at the White House, when I do a festival, when I do a fair, I mean, there's a lot of competition. And I always remember one of my very early shows. I don't do school fairs anymore, but back in 1975, I agreed to do one. And I remember I had like a little stall set up, and I was in one stall singing, and in the stall next to me was a stall where you could throw a cream pie or a shaving cream pie at your teacher, and the line in that stall was like around the block, and I had like two people in my stall. And I remember a little 5-year-old girl came up to me and said, "Mister, do you care that nobody's really listening to your songs?" Because they were throwing pies at their teacher. So I don't do too many festivals. I mean, I do some. I mean, if it's a specific audience. But the White House, I mean, there were like concurrent stages going on, and I mean, it was fun. It was great to be able to say that I performed at the White House. But in terms of like a great performance, every school show is probably better.
Yeah. I know you've performed globally. What are your most memorable either locations or performances that stick out?
Well, yeah, let's see. Of course, during the time of the ban, and gosh, I don't mean to be talking about that so much, but it seems to come up periodically here. When the schools sort of stopped calling because of that, I did a lot of schools overseas in Europe, and interestingly enough, they were American schools on military bases. So this is. The Berlin Wall was still up, and we had military bases all throughout Germany, and every base had a school with like 1,100 kids. And I did 3 or 4 tours in the schools in Europe over a period of 2 or 3 years, and those were great because you had children of families, military families. I mean, really attentive audiences, just ate up my stuff. I mean, like this was like, wow, this guy is so silly and so funny, and his songs are like really kind of, don't put your finger up your nose because your nose is not the place it goes. I mean, it was probably different than things that they'd heard before. I played a lot of border towns down in Texas. I remember. I remember one time I did a show I can't remember the town, but it was, and this was also like 30 years ago. And it was the audience was new immigrants who had just been approved to come over to the US, and many of them didn't speak English. But they had me do a show in the library for like 200 kids and their families. And it was great. I mean, the kids still ended up laughing. I guess they were coming from the way I changed my voice and the way my facial expressions and the animation of the show. And that was great to just see that even with a language barrier, they could do that. One time I played a school concert in France, and my cousin was about 6 years old, and it was a French-speaking school, and I do not speak French, but she sat on the edge of the stage, and we worked out a thing where I would just sing my songs a little slower, and she'd translate. And it was really funny because I would sing the line, and I'm used to like getting an applause, a laugh at the end of the line, and with dead silence, and then she would translate it, and then there would be this, the whole room would explode in laughter. That was a pretty fun experience for me to kind of have that delayed reaction when the lyrics were translated.
Gotcha. All right, one last question.
Sure.
What advice would you have for those of us who are doing children's and family music today?
Gosh, it's interesting because I am kind of thought of as sort of an early innovator in Kindie music because I write and record for kids and did it on my own as an independent label. I think I've always not really thought about the economics part of it. I've always done it because I've just had a calling and a love of doing it. I never set out to make to do this as a career, to make money. I mean, it became that. I think what I would say is, like anything that you write, if you write from the heart, if you write from what you're feeling, if you can observe the world around you and find a way to find something to write about and do it in an honest way, I think success will follow. I haven't been writing a whole lot in recent years. I mean, I kind of moved from music to poetry to books to music again. When my kids were born, I had a whole, in the late 80s, I had a whole raft of new songs that I wrote from the perspective of a parent. Songs about diaper rash. Be careful, it will get you if you don't watch out. It'll sneak up on your rear or somewhere thereabout. It's mean, it's nasty, it's ugly, it's red. It comes when you're sleeping alone in your bed. It's diaper rash, it's diaper rash. I mean, a great song to sing in a live concert because the punchline comes really, like as a surprise. So my songs have morphed with over the years with time. I mean, hopefully I'm not writing the same kinds of things I'm writing in the 70s. But in recent years, I'm aware that I haven't written a whole lot of new songs. I get an idea for something and I go, well, that's sort of like the song I wrote. I have 140 some songs that I've written, and many of those got rewritten. So then I branched out into books. I've done a couple adult things. So I'm not sure where the future holds. I mean, with COVID, I've been on hold in the schools. Certainly not going to be going into do a school assembly with 500 kids in one room for a while, I think. I just have to see. But I mean, I've certainly enjoyed everything that I've done up to this point, and it's been a wild ride.
Well, Barry, thank you so much for doing the show. It's been my honor to talk to you, and
my pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Great. It really was my pleasure. I enjoyed chatting.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Barry Louis Polisar, a true trailblazer in the world of children's music. To close the show, I wanted to play some of the songs that he mentioned in the interview. These all come from his family concert album, and as he said, this is probably one of the best representations of his work, him performing for a crowd and the crowd reacting to his great songs. So in order of songs that are going to be played, we're going to start with I've Got a Teacher, She's So Mean, followed by I'm a Three-Toed, Triple-Eyed, Double-Jointed Dinosaur, and then Underwear, and we'll close with Our Dog Bernard. So enjoy this music from Barry Louis Polisar.
If somebody had come up to me some years ago, told me that I would one day make my living traveling around the country singing about underwear and diaper rash, I would have probably thought they were crazy, but this is what I do for a full-time job. I travel to schools and libraries, museums, and art centers in just about every state, but I didn't set out to do this as a career. I went to college to be a teacher. While I was in school, a teacher heard me singing and playing my guitar one day and asked me if I'd come to her school and put on a concert. And as soon as the show was over, about 20 kids came up to me and started asking me questions about my songs. How do you write your songs? Where do you get your ideas? What do you do first when you get an idea? How do you write a song? So I was talking with them a little bit when all of a sudden their teacher came in. She looked at them all and said, "What are you talking for? This is an assembly program. You're not here to have a good time. Wipe those grins off your faces. You're acting just like children." Now I realized this was great material, so I quickly copied down everything she said. Went home that night and wrote a song called I Got a Teacher and She's So Mean. About 2 weeks later, my phone started ringing.
Is this Barry Louis Polisar?
Yes?
Is it true that you wrote a song about a mean teacher?
Yes?
Well, I'm a teacher and I want to know, can you come to my school and sing that song?
I got a teacher, she's so mean. She never laughs, she always screams.
She says, pay attention and do what I said.
But if you ask me, she's crazy in the head. She makes me nervous, she makes me squirm. She says all teachers must be firm. And she always calls on me when I don't raise my hand, so I answer her in ways she can't understand. She says, what is the answer to number 2?
I say, ah, doc, diddy, wop, picky, picky, poo.
She says, now don't be funny, you better get it right.
I say, shimmy, gimme, galla, gilly, tacky, ticky, tack.
She never lets us laugh, she never lets us smile. Wipe that grin off your face, you're acting just like a child. It's work, 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 no late papers today. She's tired of excuses, sighed she hates me anyway. She must hate children, she must hate kids, like only regulations, and you know I never did. And she always calls on me when I don't raise my hand, so I answer her in ways she can't understand. She says, what is the answer to number 2?
I say, ah, doc, diddy, wop, picky, picky, poo.
She says, now don't be funny, you better get it right.
I say, shimmy, gimme, galla, gilly, tacky, ticky, tack.
I never see her laughing, she's so strict. She says I'm stupid, I say she's a witch. She doesn't think it's funny when I fall off my chair. And when I call her honey, she pulls at her hair. Oh, she can't understand me, and I've got it made. But I know she really loves me, 'cause I'm still in first grade. Well, this next song was the very first song I ever wrote for kids back in 1974. The song is about a dinosaur, and I've been singing this one for so long I'm beginning to feel prehistoric. It's called I'm a three-toed, triple-eyed, double-jointed dinosaur. Toad, triple-eyed, double-jointed dinosaur. With warts up and down my back, I eat shiny automobiles, tow trucks, and airplanes. I love to munch on railroad tracks. Will I sleep all day? I get up at night to say I am well read. I eat 2 or 3 libraries for breakfast and they go right to my head. I'm a three-toed, triple-eyed, double-jointed dinosaur with warts up and down my back. I eat shiny automobiles, tow trucks, and airplanes. I love to munch on railroad tracks. Well, factories are good for snacks. I love that molten steel. And you know we all need our supply of iron in our meals. I'm a three-toed, triple-eyed, double-jointed dinosaur with warts up and down my back. I eat shiny automobiles, tow trucks, and airplanes. I love to munch on railroad tracks. ordered asparagus too. Ew. But the thing that I like most to eat is little kids just like you. I'm a double jointed dinosaur with warts up and down my back. I eat shiny automobiles, tow trucks and airplanes. I love to munch on railroad tracks. Well, I guess I should do another serious song. This next song is about underwear. Why do people laugh at underwear? You ever think about that? There's really nothing funny about underwear, right? Underwear doesn't tell you jokes. Doesn't have funny words printed on it. Underwear doesn't come to you in the middle of the night. I'm the ghost of old underwear. You don't get dressed up as underwear and go out trick-or-treating. You can see the beginning of a new trend here. Well, I decided that any word that could make people laugh that much had to be great. So I wrote a song about underwear.
Underwear is everywhere, but mostly underneath. Usually you can't see what goes on beneath. Ragged clothes, evening gowns with the finest three-piece suit. Underwear is everywhere, there is no substitute.
Everyone is equal when it comes to underwear, because beneath your underwear, it's just yourself that's there. Everyone wears underwear, or at least they should. Underwear is lots of things, but mostly it is good. Underwear is everywhere, but mostly underneath. Usually you can't see what goes on beneath. Some like the feel of cotton. I share this belief. Likewise, I don't like boxer shorts. Give me a pair of briefs. Some don't like to talk about it. That's because they're shy. People laugh at underwear, but I do not know why. Underwear is everywhere, but mostly underneath. Usually you can't see what goes on beneath. Now don't use bleach on underwear, that's what my mom will say. 'Cause bleach will eat the fabric and soon it'll wash away. And underwear with lots of holes is a sorry sight. Look around and try to see who's wearing theirs too tight. Underwear is everywhere, but mostly underneath. Usually you can't see what goes on beneath. Thank you. Actually, my dog's name is Chubby. A few years ago, Chubby ran away from home. While she was gone, I wrote this song. It's called Our Dog Bernard. It's because I couldn't rhyme Chubby. It goes like this. Our dog Bernard lived in the backyard till one warm July day, when our dog Bernard
I'm tired of this life.
He said,
I'm tired of eating the dog food blech and getting chased off all the beds. Our dog Bernard lived in the backyard till on the warm July day. When our dog Bernard, who lived in the backyard, decided to run away,
he ran off with the milkman. It's an old song, they had milkman back then. And is living with him now, I hear.
spends his nights down in darkened bar rooms,
Smoking cigarettes
and drinking beer. But our dog Bernard lived in the backyard till one warm July day. When our dog Bernard, who lived in the backyard, decided to run away.
Oh, Bernard, Bernard, please come back.
Bernard, you know
How I love you.
I'll let you ride in the Cadillac. I'll make it all up to you. One more time. Our dog Bernard lived in the backyard till one warm July day. When our dog Bernard, who lived in the backyard, decided to run away.
I've got to update that song. Milkmen and Cadillacs. Oh, Bernard, Bernard, I don't want to trouble you. I'll let you ride in the BMW.